Welcome back to the Dropping in Surf Show. My name is Rob Case. For those of you guys that don't know me, I'm a paddling technique coach located in Northern California. And today it's quite the honor to sit down with someone who created something that I've been using since I was a kid. In fact, it is he's an author, serious training for serious athletes, serious training for endurance athletes, co-written with Ray Browning, PhD, and Triathlon Freestyle Simplified, co-written with Conrad. Ooh, I'm going to butcher this name.
Goringer.
Go Ringer. Okay.
Goringer.
He's also been an elite coach of triathletes and Nordic athletes, which is an interesting combination to say the least. But most importantly, I think, at least in terms of how it's affected my life, he is the CEO and founder of Vasa Trainer. And for those of you that don't know what that is, it's a swim and surf trainer that he developed back, I want to say back in 1985, Rob, is that right?
1988 is when we started the
1988.
company.
All right. And just because we both have the same first name, so that's going to be easy. So tell us how you pronounce your last name so that we know that.
Sleamaker.
Sleamaker. Okay. See, I would have
Sleamaker,
butchered
yeah.
that one. I would have butchered
Yeah,
that one. I was thinking
thank you.
Slay,
Yeah.
Slaymaker.
Yeah.
So that's quite a resume, and like I said, I'm quite honored to sit down and talk with you because, in my experience, I think I came across Vasa for the first time when I was 12 in our club team, our club swim team, and it was just in the gym, and our coach was like, "Yeah, go hop on that if you want and get some reps in." And then since then, I've always seen it in gyms. I've always seen it at the pool. Um, I used it through college. I used it post college. Anytime I kind of couldn't get in the water or I wanted to supplement my swimming or paddling, I'd hop on a Vasa. So, just my first question of all the things that you've done kind of professionally, what stands out to you as the kind of the most the thing you're most proud of over the years? Is it the writing the books? Is it the creation of the Vasa? Is it training people? What's like the top of your list that you look back and you're like, that's pretty awesome. I did that.
I don't think it's necessarily any one of the three books or the various Vasa products per se. It's the it's the opportunities that producing those created for meeting and engaging with some amazing people.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the those are the outcomes for the various creative um, steps I took for writing the books and for creating the products. But it's meeting all the people that have been involved either in making those things happen or in using our products or using our books. And I'm especially proud when someone tells me that using using one of the books of the products that we make, one of the Vasa trainers or something, like had a significant impact in their lives. And then the ripple effect that took place with what they were able to do,
Yeah.
because they went on to perform better and they stood on a platform that influenced other people in positive ways. So to me, that's what it's all about, what I'm most proud of.
Yeah. No, it's a very kind of teacher uh similarity in that when I work with a client, it's that the pride that you take into what you've created and what they've actually been able to accomplish. So their goals and what they've accomplished kind of feel like your goals in a sense, which is kind of neat.
Yeah, no, it's a good feeling. And I'm sure you know this from your experience in swimming and in surfing, but I mean, gee, our our Voss's niche target markets and customers basically they're either swimmers or swim coaches or triathletes, triathlon coaches, surfers, surf coaches, physical therapists, and trainers. People, physical trainers, and boy, it's rare that you run into somebody who isn't a nice person and isn't really fun to talk with, and because we're all in alignment with what we're trying to do individually as well as collectively. So
Yeah.
it's pretty cool to be part of a group of people, like-minded people like that.
Yeah. Yeah, were any of those influences early on? Did any of the feedback you got on your early versions of it kind of mold how you changed the Vasa over the years? How many versions did you actually have before you brought it to market? What was that process like?
Well, okay, so it's kind of a funny story, and I'll be try to be as quick as I can and give you the Reader's Digest condensed version. But so the very first Vasa trainer that I created in 1988 was, all of the products that I've, been involved with creating the root of them came from seeing a problem that my creative ideas I thought could solve that problem. So the very first Vasa trainer was actually designed as a result of working with elite cross country skiers and biathletes. And in the early 80s, you relate to this because of swimming, but in the early 80s, the only technique in Nordic skiing was, it's now called classic skiing, or it's a diagonal stride. If you've ever seen anybody use a Nordic track machine, or even just walking on a treadmill, swinging your arms forward and backwards. That's the motion that was the technique for classic Nordic skiing. And then in the early 80s, actually a fellow Vermonter, you may have heard of Bill Koch, was one of the first Olympic medalists for the US in Nordic skiing. And he innovated skating on skis. It's now called freestyle skiing and freestyle skate skiing. And we studied the biomechanics and the propulsive forces of skating on skis versus the old classic style. And a lot more energy and a lot more propulsion came from the upper body, basically from the hip flexors up. So I developed this Vasa trainer that, instead of laying down, the one that people are familiar with is you lay down and you simulate a swimming stroke or a surf paddling stroke. But the very first one, you actually were straddling a rail, not unlike being on a bicycle, with the center post in the middle, but it was the monorail that was in the middle. And so when you did a double poling motion, which is, reaching forward, pulling down and backwards, the whole seat carriage would go up this inclined monorail, and then you'd lower yourself back down. So works great, still works great after all these years, but the Nordic ski market was pretty small, and we were late to the market. And so basically I was scratching my head going, man, I've got a lot of product here I've got to sell. Thankfully, when I was inventing that first product, I had also made it so that you could swap out the bike seat portion and put a padded bench that you lay down on
Yeah.
and do swimming motion. So we I believe it was early 1990, we took it to the American Swim Coaches conference in Pittsburgh, and three coaches in particular came over, and they were going nuts over the Vasa trainer, which it looks similar to the one that we make now, although it was still way too big. And but they went nuts, and I had no idea who they were, and they each of them ordered multiple machines right there on the spot. So I said to my it was my brother-in-law actually who went to help me at this clinic, because we didn't know what we were doing. And I said, I think maybe we're onto something. And when I looked at the program for the clinic or for the conference, those three guys were all Olympic coaches. And you may be familiar with the name. Well, he's now passed on, Richard Quick, and he was at Texas, and then was at Stanford for a long time. And then North Thornton, who was at UC Berkeley, he coached
Yeah.
Matt Biondi
Yeah.
famously. He's passed on, unfortunately. And then Richard Schulberg, who was a famous coach at Germantown Academy outside of Philadelphia, and one of my favorite people, and he's still alive. And those three guys went absolutely bonkers. They said, where have you been? We've been looking for something like this for 10 years. And, and one of the things they loved about it was that you could, anchor your hand, your pulling paddle, if you will, and pull your body past that point. Because when you pull on the straps, your whole body that's laying on the rolling bench just goes up an incline. And then you have to use control to lower yourself back down, which worked not just the stroke path, but it worked the eccentric muscles of that stroke path. So you get the concentric pulling and the eccentric lowering of your body back down using the right stroke path
Yeah.
that good swimmers would use. And so the rest is history, because we kind of, even though we kept making the Nordic machine for a little while, we pretty much just switched over to the Vasa Trainer. And
Wow.
then, yeah, so
That's incredible. Like that, I love hearing these stories about how someone would pivot something into different markets or different uses. And this one sounded like it was gold. It was perfect to have those guys
yeah,
see that in the moment.
you've probably heard the definition of luck that I like the best is luck is when opportunity meets preparedness.
Yeah, yeah.
So we were prepared, but the opportunity was being in the right place where these coaches discovered us, and then it just sort of slowly took off from there.
Yeah, and it's in I'm now, but they were excited about that anchoring of the hand concept because that's been around since the 60s when Doc Councilman started to do research and started to bring up that concept. And then again, it was reiterated in the 80s with Ernie Muglisco and some other
Yep,
coaches. And it was just every swim coach at the time was looking for, this concept, which is extremely abstract. But when you actually put someone on the Vasa, it's like that's exactly what it does. And just like you said, it works not just in the correct motion, but the eccentric reverse motion, which my coaches make me do thousands of reps on the Vasa or on a band in that same pattern over and over and over
right,
again. And it had everything to do with technique for me when I first was introduced to it. Um,
sure.
which you know my listeners know that that's kind of where I focus everything. It's technique first and then fitness second, but you can do them simultaneously as well. And Vasa is probably the best tool that I've seen that does both simultaneously, which is really cool. I think that the other side of kind of the business side, and then we'll move on to some of the technical stuff. But I'm always curious, early 90s, pre-internet, you go to this conference, how else did you get the word out? Was it all word of mouth? Like, were you calling gyms up? Because now they're in almost every gym around the world that I visited.
Right, thanks. Well, before the internet, we were have always been a direct marketing company, and the way that we conducted ourselves was a sort of a classic um, way called the two-step direct marketing, where you either you place an ad or you go to an expo or a clinic like that, or um, maybe you could buy a mailing list back in those days. Like we could go to the American Swim Coaches and say, could we rent your mailing list and we'll send out a flyer to all of your coaches, right? So that's the first of the two steps. And so they would see our marketing materials, advertisement or a flyer, or see us in person. And then they'd raise their hand and say, I want a little bit more information. Or in some cases, they would say, I want to buy that thing. But so then we would mail them a pretty big brochure package. And you may remember those days when if you signed up for a big ticket item, they'd probably send you a packet of information
Yeah,
in the mail.
yeah,
Well, so that's how we did it. And you just you track what's working and what doesn't work, and you add a little more kerosene to the fires that are burning bright, and then you douse the other ones that don't work well,
yeah, yeah,
and you just kind of keep growing, you're growing that way. And word of mouth has always been huge, and that's one of the biggest compliments in my opinion, because when people tell other people about your product or your service or what have you, genuinely on their own without any prompting from anybody else, that tells you that you're doing something right and you're helping other people, serving other people in the right way. So
Yeah, that's
word of
great.
mouth has always been big. So
It helps me confirm how I run my business as well. It's great to see someone that has been in it so long say that. Uh, what do you think has been kind of like your greatest struggles over the years, either with design or engineering or even marketing or really
uh,
anything, and how have you dealt with it?
sure. Great question. I mean, so to me, the problem solving and creating, innovating and creating either new products or making improvements to old products. I mean, to me, that's really fun and the most entertaining. So that part has never really been a big challenge for me. Um, I think the biggest challenge for me personally, being a creative guy and really in love with ideas and problem solving and stuff like that, is that you can have that, and also I was trained as a sports physiologist, and so I also bring the science and all of that into my writing, into my coaching, and even into the product development, to try to make them better. So, but to the challenge of all of this is that you can have all the technical expertise in the world, um, but running a business is very different. And something I like to use analogies a lot. So if you think about, let's say a soccer team, and you got two soccer teams, and you got 11 people per side, 11 players per side, right? So each of those players has an assignment, right? They have a position to play, they have an assignment. Now they might cross over and cover for each other, and that's good. That it's good. So if you use that analogy and say, okay, to your team of people in your company, there's you're going to have your salesperson, you're going to have your marketing people, you're going to have production and inventory management, you're going to have bookkeeping, um, research and development, these different departments or positions on the field, if you think of it that way. But most people or many people, they go into a business and start a business with some kind of a technical expertise and maybe a loose awareness that you also have to cover all those other positions on the field somehow. And you either hire people to do it or you subcontract people to do it, like a bookkeeper or an accountant or a lawyer. Those are the best ones to subcontract, in my opinion. And then you also need to get people on the team working well together and some cross training to help each other, but also just working really well together. So I would say the biggest challenge for me was, first of all, coming to that awareness, and second, um, maintaining decent leadership to keep everybody working together and keep the team working better. Because I don't particularly like that part of it. So
Yeah.
that's the biggest challenge for me, is because I don't gravitate toward things that I don't really have interest in, but I recognize that it needs to be done. And so, it's one of those things where, you know, you have to decide, are you going to continue in this role as the founder and still be the CEO and the leader of the company, or you're going to find someone great who assumes that role and you advise and guide and do what you're best at. So, to me, I add the most value to my company by being innovative and creating and finding, and also trying to find the right people to be in the right seats on the bus.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's a team effort at the end of the day to put out the product that you put out today. I mean,
Abs-
yeah,
Absolutely. Right.
that's very cool. So kind of changing gears a little bit, how did you enter the surf world, and when did the surf world kind of, it was more the surf world knocked on your door, said, "Hey, this
Absolutely.
thing's pretty awesome."
Yeah, yeah, it was, again, in sort of the same vein as word of mouth, how word of mouth works, right? So apparently, I don't know if you're familiar with Sam George, who was the editor of Surfer Magazine, and what an amazing, incredible guy he is. I mean, I only met him a couple of times, but amazing guy. And so apparently he had injured his Achilles heel in probably like this would have been around 1994, 1995 or something. And he must have I think he called one of my people, one of my marketing people, and asked if he could borrow a Vasa trainer. And he was going to write a review about it, which he ended up doing. Um, and but he also wanted to use it during this rehabilitation phase. So anyway, fast forward, he about a year later, the phone started ringing off the hook, and it was all these surfer guys. And I'll never forget my employees saying like, "There's all these surfer dudes calling. Like, who are these guys anyway?" And so we got to we asked somebody, one of the people that called, and we said, "How'd you hear about us?" And they said, "Oh, well, it's in Surfer Magazine, a Sam George's surf tip article." So we looked it up. We called up Sam and said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you that we published this article." And Surfer Magazine was quite big back then. I don't know if it's still as big. It's more of a web-based site now, but anyway, long story short, they discovered us. And as Sam pointed out in that original surf tip article, I'm sure things have changed for surfers now, but he said that most surfers didn't necessarily think of themselves as athletes, like swimmers think of themselves like athletes or triathletes. And he had originally heard about the Vasa trainer through a triathlon friend of his who had one. He tried it a couple times, and that's what got him to call us and ask if he could, borrow one or take one on loan. And so anyway, that's sort of the story about surfing. And we got a lot of momentum early on with surfers, and then it just has continued. Um, Sort of this very quiet niche market that we have.
Yeah, yeah, and it must have like that call must have been so weird for all of your people because they're probably thinking of like Fast Times at Ridgemont High, surfers. And all these guys are calling up saying, "Hey, I want to work out. I want to use this." And it kind of shifted everyone's paradigm
Yeah,
about, what a surfer is. And to kind of update you, Surfer Magazine was always huge. It is more web-based now. The magazine's gone. Some other magazines have kind of picked up where it's left off digitally, but major influence. And Sam has been a major influence and voice in our culture.
yes,
So I'm not surprised that you started getting a ton of calls and just the evolution that surfers have gone through. It used to be, no, we're not really athletes. It's a lifestyle thing. We're hardcore. We don't really work out. But there's been a few pro surfers over the year that have really kind of ratcheted up the sports side of things and have taken it more seriously. And on top of that, you have now this I like to say it's kind of the beginnings of surf science research, and it
right.
was around the early 2000s, the late 90s is when I started seeing just little bits of research because I've always been doing studying the swim research and the technique over the years, and then every once in a while you see little dots of surf science, and it's really come on in the last decade. And Vasa has actually been, and I don't know if you know this, but Vasa has been a huge part of those early studies
Oh,
because it's
yes,
it's
yeah,
quite difficult to study being in water, right? You always have this air and water situation, and the Vasa was always a nice stable platform. It was consistent, it was neutral.
yeah,
And just to kind of give you some background in that I've of research studies that I've found, University of Western Australia back in 2005 used it, or an erg machine, which some of them actually said Vasa out of Vermont, and then some of them said an
right,
erg machine,
yeah,
There was Griffith University in 2010, CSU San Marcos here in Southern California, who I get to work with every once in a while. They focus mostly on the metabolic measurements and heart rate.
right,
Um, uh, there was over in Spain, even Auckland, New Zealand had it in the early 2010s, and then even over in the UK. And then, of course, there's even more on swimming, even the
sure,
predecessors of those studies. So, I mean, just thinking about how it's being used in science to benefit, not only technique but fitness and this,
Right.
not even surfing but swimming and surfing as a whole. Kind of what are your thoughts on this, and how does it make you
Sure.
feel?
Well, first of all, let me clarify something that, the model that the Vasa Trainer model that Sam George discovered and started using, we call it currently we call it the Vasa Trainer Pro, and that works very much like, well, it works exactly the same as the one I described, that the early swim coaches found, where you're pulling your body past your hand. Quite a few of the research articles that I've seen that mention using Vasa is they're using our swim ergometer. And the swimming ergometer model, which came out in 2004, late 2004, think if people want to visualize what that looks like or how it works, think of uh, a rowing machine for swimming. So you're still laying prone. You can lay supine if you want to on your back, but when you reach forward and you pull on the paddles or the handles, it they pull these cords that make a fan wheel inside the front of the machine. They make that fan wheel go around, and it's that air brake resistance, which is we also have some very sophisticated electronics that feed force data into the power meter that comes with the machine, the display monitor that comes with the erg. So it's very different than the one that Sam George was using, because while that one works really great for developing specific strength, and you can use it for endurance too if you set the resistance low enough. And you can do like 200 exercises with the Trainer Pro. The swimmer is oriented a lot more toward simulating the feeling and the physical requirements of pulling through water. So just like when you're laying on your surfboard, and if you pull, your hand and paddle blade, if you will, is pulling through water, um, it's a very similar resistance. Air brake resistance is really great for that versus say other types of resistance. And so I'm not sure what else to say there, but that it's important to clarify the difference. And I think those research studies were able to, depending on what they were trying to find out, the using the swimmer for the studies is much better for like metabolic requirements of surfing, maybe not so much for measuring like strength output, but you could measure power output. And you can also measure things like your power output, if you can sustain that. Because when fatigue sets in, then the amount of power you can deliver to your paddle blades, your arms, really diminishes off. And so I think that's part of some of the studies we're looking at that as well as your ability to sustain that paddling. And the swimmer paddling on the swimmer is very, very similar to paddling your board in the water, from as near as I can tell.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. From a propulsion point of view, and like you said, the feeling of the air resistance, it's much closer. Absolutely.
Yeah, I
And
mean, it's
it's
not
so
the
funny.
same balance. It's nowhere
Right.
near the same balance, laterally and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
but yeah,
Well, and that's like, what I teach, half of it, the first half is reducing drag, which, really any strength program you can't simulate that on land. But the setup of being able to reduce drag that moves into propulsion, there it's perfect for that. And it's so
right.
funny. It's one of the studies was two reliable protocols for assessing maximal paddling performance in surfboard riders back in 2010 by Griffith University, and using the swim erg Vasa, and I believe they actually even spoke about Vasa in there, was one of the two protocols. And so from that study on, it just kind of lit all these additional studies and say, okay, we're going to use this protocol for these measurements. And I think that's so cool to, not only affect people that are using it recreationally to improve their sport and their performance, but also be kind of a foundation in science to help these researchers provide evidence for certain
Right.
techniques, and I don't know, I feel like surf science, and I've said this before on the show, surf science today is really in its infancy. It's kind of like we're back in the 60s for swimming. That
Hmm.
was when the first studies kind of started to come out and everyone's kind of
Right.
fumbling through it. We luckily can look at some of the swim stuff and kind of leverage some of it to come up with new ideas.
Sure.
And the problem has been, um, is not having the tools available with a surfboard. And it's so funny,
Right.
the Vasa is like so perfect for that. One of them said that they made modifications to the erg was one of their statements. And really all they did is they put a surfboard on that bench.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is a great idea because the rails are a little wider than our padded bench.
Right, right, right. And it's so interesting because that's one of the techniques I run into is when you have long boards which are wider versus short boards which are narrower. You have one of the major issues people have is when they go from wide to narrow, they still have the wide stroke.
Sure.
And as you know through coaching, swimmers, if you're going out wide and you're doing the propulsive strokes wide, you're actually not tapping into the fullest potential of your power muscles instead of having it in front of your shoulder, which is more physiologically strong for humans.
Right. Right.
And so I love that ability to kind of move out, move in, you know, if I were to make a modification to it is be able to take that pad that you have on there and widen it or narrow it, right? Have little extensions or something like that. But I mean, those are the little things that like I get
Sure.
excited about with
Yeah.
these kinds of tools.
Well, there's other ways to accomplish what you just said, which is like one of the things that we recommend is imagine if you're laying on the swimmer and you can look down at the floor. If you put some you can just use colored masking tape, but if you ran colored masking tape that's parallel to the monorail, but on either side of the monorail, and in the direction of your stroke path, right? You can, depending on someone's shoulder width or how wide you want their pull to be, let their fingertips trace that line. Now they won't touch the line because they're way above it by a foot or two, but they can visualize and see, oh, my fingertips need to trace that line, right? So now you've got the stroke path that you want them to do. And to your point about if they're pulling too wide, it's also very likely when they pull, they also may be almost doing like a slight S pull or something coming toward a center line, like toward the center line of the board. If they do that, that means their board is going like this,
Hmm.
right? It's shimmying side to side.
Yeah.
That's more drag. If they also don't have the consciousness, which this is something they can practice on the Vasa, but if they're not being conscious about maintaining a long and taut body line from head to toe, I mean, it's not quite the same with surfing because you got to look up and all of that. But think of those like from your toes all the way out through your core, making your core and your torso really taut and strong. They're gonna reduce the drag. But if they're loosey goosey on their board, then there's gonna be way more drag.
Yeah, yeah. And less
And
power output.
yeah, I
Yeah.
like to use an analogy. We talk about it for swimmers in triathletes, but um, if the listeners can picture, let's say we're standing on the beach and the water's calm and you've got a carbon fiber kayak that's pointing directly out to sea, perpendicular to the beach, right? And you push the end of that carbon fiber kayak, that baby glides, right? It goes out there and it glides. Now take an inflatable kayak and do the same thing, right? So you push that inflatable kayak and then it goes like, it's like it bombs out after about 3 feet.
Yeah.
So if you think of your body like that carbon fiber kayak versus the inflatable kayak, you want your vessel that you're paddling, right? You want that thing to be long and taut as much as you can. And also, as you point out in some of your videos, balanced fore and aft
Yeah.
so that, or to a degree, so that your legs aren't sinking too much and you're not creating all this extra drag.
Which is all
So,
which is all coming from the core, anyway. And that's
right. Right.
People, members of my course know that the first two steps are all about that balance. You know, that if you
Yeah.
don't have that, you're not even gonna get, you're gonna have more drag to your point, but also you're not gonna get the power. You're not gonna get that power output that your body could potentially have. And it'd be
Right.
interesting to study, or somehow mimic that on the Vasa, where you have kind of loosey goosey core and try to, on the erg,
Yeah.
because it provides power output. I'm sure you would see a difference
Oh, you
if
totally do.
you're
And you can
taught.
see it in the watts, on the power meter. So like we've seen this before when people are loosey goosey and they're not really tightening their core and making their legs, long and taut and everything. And they'll pull at a certain resistance setting on the erg, and you look at their watts, and then you tell them, all right, I want you to tighten everything up, or I want you also within the paddle stroke itself, when during the stroke do you accelerate that pulling motion, and then when do you get out? Like when do you exit the stroke, so to speak, with your hand? All of those things can influence the power output, but it's pretty remarkable what happens when people somehow tie their torso and their core to, I call it the catch and the pull, um, because when they get that connected, all of that torso strength, it's like a torsional spring. It's just right there, ready to deliver more power into the pulling stroke, as well as you're accessing your lats. If you do the right technique, you're accessing the big muscles of the back and the core. And that just translates into moving the board ahead more efficiently.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. More
and so I
effectively. Like,
would, yeah,
yeah, I mean, we're talking about technique because I'm a big technique nerd as well. What other kind of advantages or strengths do you think the Vasa brings for surfers? There's that's an immediate thing that someone could test. They could hop on
right,
there, their core could be all loose, they could pull for a minute, check the
yeah,
wattage, and then tighten up and check the wattage. They'll easily see an improvement.
sure. Well,
So,
we could get all techie and tech weenie about this whole thing, but what I would say is, you know, I'm going to make a guess that the audience that's listening to this, they're not aspiring to be an Olympic or even a pro surfer, right? But probably the thing that using a machine like ours, or even a variety of different pieces of exercise equipment that to help them accomplish a level of fitness, is that it affords the person the opportunity to stay consistent and keep building, right? So there's a bunch of different ways to do that, and incorporating the surf paddling specificity of a Vasa machine, I believe is really valuable, and we've got enough testimonials from surfers who say that. But you still need to do things for balance, for your lower body, for your core, all of those things in concert with. It's not just doing the paddling specific training on a Vasa machine that's going to do it for you. But I will say this, and I'm not a surfer. I've surfed a few times and I understand, I think I understand the demands pretty much. But talking to other people like Sam George and lots of other people over the years, it's come to my attention that paddling out, and then again, when you turn around and you're ready to catch the wave that you want. So you do that over and over again repeatedly. There is a level of fitness that's required in order to be able to do that well and do what you need your body to do um, consistently. No different than an open water swimmer. They might get from point A to point B, you know, in a similar time as before they started training, but they're going to get there more efficiently. They're going to spend less energy from point A to point B, which a triathlete, that means they've got more energy for the bike and the run.
yeah,
In the surfing world, it means if you show up at the beach at your surf break or whatever, and you've been training consistently all week at home because you're landlocked and you can't get to the water, but you've got weekends and you can get there, right? Or if it's a surf vacation or something like that, and you've been keeping yourself fit, doing the right exercises, many of which you've talked about in some of your the things that I've been seeing. Um, then you're going to have a more enjoyable time. You're going to be able to surf safer, longer, not have that like crazy feeling of like a knife in the back of your neck, from not having paddled enough, not
Yeah.
having trained enough. So it's really comes down to the choice of the surfer, like how prepared would they like to be?
Yeah.
How much do they want to enjoy? Of course, when you're a young buck, you don't give a hoot as much, but when you start to get a little bit older and you're chasing kids around at home or you're working at a desk job, it's a real thing because you could get out there and you could get hurt. And then you're not surfing for quite a while because
Yeah.
you weren't your body wasn't ready for it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's you're spot on. My stories of also working with clients, I've actually had a few video coaching sessions with people that live in Colorado or Wyoming, or I've had one in New York who's more inland. And these guys, they have Vasas in their basements or in their house, and I've worked with them just on technique and then a little bit on some of the fitness side of things. And those guys are a perfect example of what you're talking about, where they're not surfing as often as, say, me. I'm about 30 minutes from the coast and I surf almost every day, but they're surfing, once a quarter, but they're going to better waves than me. I'll tell you that. And they want to be spot on. They want to be ready,
Sure.
and surfing, I've told other people this a lot, is it's 90% of it's paddling. And so if that part of it is so challenging for you, then you're not going to enjoy the remaining 5 to 10% of the time, which is actually riding. That's surfing. It's kind of named poorly. It should be paddling with a little bit of standing.
Okay.
Um,
Rob,
but
I'm
it
curious, in
yeah.
your experience, when someone starts to get like pretty fatigued from all the paddling out, the 90% of paddling or whatever, how does that affect their ability to ride once they catch the wave?
Oh yeah. It fully affects it. To the point where the first maneuver, you could say, is just getting to their feet,
Yeah.
commonly known as the pop-up. And if you're paddling and you're using all upper body strength, and now you're trying to use upper body strength, and now you're engaging the core to swing your legs under you, that part's inaccurate. And they fall or tumble, and then their ride is 1 second long. And so their whole session is them just kind of wiping out and paddling. Once they're riding, let's say they do get to their feet, now they're riding and they're using a lot more core and twisting in legs now than the upper body. And on two separate occasions, they've studied that the highest heart rate actually occurs when they kick out of a wave. So it's not when
Uh-huh.
they're paddling out, it's not when they're catching a wave, but it's when they're done with the wave. And now a lot of surfers, and this is something I tell a lot of my clients, like, hey, just take a moment, lower that heart rate, and then paddle out. But most surfers will immediately start paddling back out. And so now they're just elevating that heart rate, heart rate, heart rate, heart rate, heart rate.
Sure.
And if
Sure.
fitness is not there, then their performance, exponentially decreases.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So that makes me think about something I have never thought about this before, except in other sports. So I'll use a similar or an analogy, not really an analogy, but just like a parallel story. So if I put my cross country skis on and jump in the tracks and I just start going for it, right? Well, physiologically, and I know this as an exercise physiologist, my body has not warmed up. And within a couple of 100 meters, I will have accumulated what's called an oxygen debt, right? I'm gonna have to pay that debt, or I've got it's a bunch of lactic acid, waste products, all this other stuff that's built up really quickly. Whereas if I start out very slowly and ease my way into it, get my body warmed up, especially the muscles used in propulsion, if I get those warmed up, then I'm not going to have that terrible oxygen debt. I used to call it for Nordic skiers. It's that bear that jumps on your back, right? And you got to carry that bear around the track the rest of the time, right? I would imagine for surfers, if they kick out of a wave and they start paddling hard right away, now they got a walrus on their back.
Yeah. Yeah. You got it. It's exactly
Okay.
the same. And it's funny because even swimmers that transition to surfing will still experience that because it is slightly different with the balance,
Sure,
uh,
sure.
and and the other movements. But I love that. I love that analogy, a walrus. Um, it's so funny though because I brought up the three clients that I've coached virtually using Vasa that are more inland, but I would argue that that same argument applies to people that live 5 or 10 minutes from the beach, and that can't access the water easily. They can't go out for a paddle. If you figure, at least here in Northern California, you always got to put a wetsuit on and off, and it's
Oh
easily
yeah.
10 minutes added. So let's say I have if I live right at the beach and I have a half hour to surf, I actually only have 20 minutes to surf,
Right.
right? And so, that's usually not even the case. If I'm right now, I'm 30 minutes from the beach. If I have an hour, that's just my travel time, right?
Sure.
And so I could look at it, go, well, I got an hour. For me, I have a lagoon, so I go paddle. But let's say I don't have that. Like hopping on a Vasa for 20 minutes would keep things, as you said, consistent, and
Sure.
it keeps that base level foundation much higher, and could even improve it with just some general consistency, so that when you do get back in the water, because life happens, as you said,
Yeah.
we got jobs, we got families, it's really tough, but being able to just hop on and hop off, getting something good for at least 20, 30 minutes, whether
Right.
it's fitness or technique, you're keeping that base, and that's
Sure.
the first thing to go, when you're
Yeah,
not
yeah.
in water. So I would argue for uh, the people listening, like if they're like, oh, I live near the coast, I'm not an inland surfer. It's like, no, you could benefit from something like this on a consistent basis because of just the way life is, right?
Right, right.
If you have 20, 30 minutes, you can hop on one of these. You could easily find 20, 30 minutes at some point during the day. And if you end up being able to surf that same day, that's even better for you. So
Yeah, you make a good point, Rob. In fact, I've had reports from various masters swimmers and triathletes in particular, some surfers too, but they'll you don't need, you can still be in your pajamas if you want to, or your underwear, and you can hop on for 15 minutes, right? Then go do your shower, go to work, do your thing, and then a little bit later in the day, do another 10 or 15 minutes.
yeah,
And it all counts, it all adds up. And they say that it really makes a big difference having that convenience. I would also assert that if someone wants to think about the pain points for when they're actually surfing, when they get to go to the water, like really pay attention. What are the pain points? What are the things that get in the way of you surfing better or longer or feeling more comfortable or safe, whatever the pain points are for those people, and address those with your at-home workout program, whether you have a Vasa or not, doesn't matter to me. What I want is people to have more fun doing their sport and be safe doing their sport and be able to do it until they're 90, or whatever. But like, so it's, your requirements are going to change over the years, but there's still the fundamentals of you've got paddling power and paddling endurance. You have all the core and torso exercises that you've taught and teach with your program. Lower body with legs, for balance, for agility, for strength and endurance, ability to, keep riding. They need to incorporate two or three exercises for each body group there and get them done. Do
yeah.
do it 3 times a week, something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I profess this all the time, and you mentioned it. It's consistency is key, with a lot of this. It's just do it for, if you do it
Sure.
every day, if it's 20 minutes a day, that's better than 1 2 hour session on the weekend. It's that consistency that we need.
There's a great expression that I learned from somebody else, but you got to take people need to be conscious in our society these days where we spend a lot of time seated at a desk, at a car, watching television, going out to eat, or sitting with dinner, sitting, right?
Yeah.
So you got to be conscious about the countermeasures for sitting and educate yourself about what are the countermeasures that you need to take as an individual surfer, individual athlete, whatever you want to call yourself, that are going to allow you to enjoy your sport more
Yeah.
and longer.
Yeah. Yeah, it's frustrating for surfers to not train and then get out and get injured, like you said, or they just have a bad session because they're so exhausted. And with
Yeah.
surfing, there's even an added element of scarcity because it's not like you can go and shoot hoops for an hour, right, and get that rep over and over and over again. Every wave is different and
Oh,
there's a crowd and there's
right.
limited number of waves. And so, you give yourself an hour to surf, 2 hours to surf, you might get 10, 15 waves, and that's a good day. And they're all going to be
Oh,
different. And your ability to progress in surfing is very challenging when you're limited to that. Even
okay.
more
Yeah,
so if your paddling's terrible, right? Because you're going to get maybe 5 waves, if that, in a 2 hour
sure,
session, which is crazy,
sure.
you know,
Well, that
much
I
more
had
difficult to excel.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it quite that way because I'm not close to, the realities of surfing like you are. I hadn't thought about that. The number of it's that's like me saying like, well, I can only go out and Nordic ski X number of days a year because we don't have snow for the
Not
rest of the
not
time.
even that, Rob. It'd be like you have 5 minutes to go Nordic ski. That's all you get.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and and
right.
and and half the track you have to get out and walk on dirt and then put them back on like in the little patches of snow. That's how rare it is. It's wild. It is
Oh,
wild.
that's a great visual. I like that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, anyway, thank you. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it. I had a blast talking, and I'm sure this won't be the last time that we talk. And I think the listeners learned a bit from you, and I hope that they feel motivated to go grab a Vasa or at least try one at their local gym to see if it's for them. I think it's for every surfer. But I
Well,
appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
you're welcome, Rob. Thank you. And it's been a pleasure to talk with you. Anytime, just let me know.
Awesome. You take me Nordic skiing, and I'll take you surfing.
That sounds great. You're gonna have to fly out to Vermont, though.
I spent 5 winters in New Hampshire. I was really close to you for a bit. So I
Oh,
got to try cross country skiing, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It is quite the workout.
well, it's the most demanding sport in the world for in terms of your cardiovascular conditioning, and rowing is a close second.
Yeah,
You know,
it
competitive
was
competitive
incredible.
rowing, competitive skiing, Nordic
Yeah.
skiing.
It was incredible. We went up to it was actually a place in Vermont. We went to no, it was in Maine. We went to it was a cross country kind of clinic, and it started at midnight in the
Oh,
winter, and it was like -5, and I was like, I had every piece of clothing on just to stay warm, and I was shedding that as fast as I could within 5 minutes. I mean, it was
yes.
incredible how fast. Anyway, yeah, I'll take on that challenge. I'll reintroduce you to some surfing, and we'll take it from there. Sound good?
Yeah, yeah. You want me to tell you one funny Sam George story before we go?
Yes, yes, please.
So he had written that article, and it just so happened it was coincidental, but maybe a year later or whatever, I was in Southern California, and my friend Ray Browning, the guy who co-authored Serious Training for Endurance Athletes with me, we were there on business doing something, right? So I said, I'd really like to meet this guy Sam George in person and thank him for writing that article because it was so profound. So we go to the Surfer magazine offices in Dana Point, and they bring us into Sam. He's sitting there in his office, in blue jeans and a Hawaiian shirt and barefoot, right? And so we literally like shook hands and talked for 20 seconds, and he goes, "You guys want to go surfing?" And we had never been, right? So we go, "Yeah, hell yeah, we'll go." And so he took us down to I think it was San Onofre or something like that. And he had us outfitted in wetsuits, and he had a foam training board that we could use. And both of us were pretty fit, but Ray was a professional triathlete, so he gets on that board, that training board. He was like turbocharged paddling that thing out there, and I wasn't even close to what he could do with the paddling. But I'll never forget that because Sam, he like taught us. He hung onto the back of the board and he helped us get up and catch these little dinky waves, and we actually got to ride a few waves. It was so fun.
That's awesome. And I love that that is the culture of surfing. It's the aloha of surfing, trying to pass it on. And I absolutely love that story. Thanks for sharing that. And
Yeah.
again, thanks for your time, Rob. That was awesome.
Well, you're welcome.
All
Take
right,
care.
take care. Bye.
Thanks. Bye bye.